Tonight on Dreadful Visions. Elevators are one of the few places where complete strangers willingly lock themselves inside a small metal box together. Millions of rides happen every single day without incident, and most people never give them a second thought. But every now and then, an elevator stops on a floor where no one pressed the button, the doors open to an empty hallway, or someone steps inside who was never supposed to be there. These are 5 unsettling elevator horror stories inspired by the ordinary moments that become unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Story 1. Someone kept calling the elevator. By the time 26-year-old Ethan Parker left the accounting office each night, most of downtown Chicago had already gone quiet. Tax season had pushed everyone on his team into 12-hour workdays, and staying until nearly midnight had become routine. The building itself wasn't old, but once the other businesses closed, it felt strangely abandoned. Nearly 20 floors of offices sat in silence, while only a handful of lights remained visible through the glass windows overlooking the city. The elevator bank sat in the center of the lobby, serving all 20 floors. During the day, the doors were constantly opening and closing as employees rushed between meetings, but after 11 p.m., Ethan usually had the entire building to himself. Or so he thought. On his 3rd consecutive week of late nights, something unusual happened. As Ethan packed away his laptop on the 19th floor, he heard the familiar mechanical hum of the nearby elevator arriving. Curious, he glanced through the office windows toward the hallway. The illuminated floor indicator changed from 18 to 19, and the doors slid open. Nobody stepped out. After waiting several seconds, the doors quietly closed again before the elevator continued downward. He assumed someone on another floor had accidentally pressed the wrong button. It wasn't worth thinking about. The following night, the exact same thing happened. 11:42 p.m. The elevator traveled all the way to the 19th floor. The doors opened. Nobody entered. Nobody exited. This time, Ethan walked into the hallway himself. The corridor was empty. Every office around him had already been locked for hours. He even checked the nearby stairwell. Nothing. The elevator remained waiting patiently until the doors closed once more. By Friday, curiosity had replaced confusion. Before leaving his office, Ethan stood beside the elevator and watched the floor display. 11:41 p.m. The numbers climbed steadily. 15, 16, 17, 18. The doors opened. Again, no one. He stepped inside and looked at the control panel. One button was glowing. 4:12. The elevator hadn't finished its journey. As soon as the doors closed, it descended without Ethan pressing anything. When it reached the 12th floor, the doors opened once more. The hallway beyond was completely dark. Unlike the occupied offices above, the entire 12th floor had been vacant for months while a former law firm searched for new tenants. Rows of empty offices stretched into darkness. No movement, no sound. The doors eventually closed by themselves. The elevator returned to the lobby. The incident bothered Ethan enough that he mentioned it to the overnight security guard the following Monday. The guard smiled. He'd heard similar complaints before. According to building management, the elevator occasionally developed electrical faults that caused random floor calls. Nothing dangerous, just an inconvenience. That explanation made sense. Until Wednesday. Working later than usual, Ethan happened to glance through the office window at exactly 11:42 p.m. The elevator arrived, but this time, someone was already standing inside. A man wearing dark clothing faced the back wall of the elevator completely motionless. His reflection wasn't visible from Ethan's angle, only his back. The doors remained open for several seconds. The man never moved, never looked around, never reached for the controls. Without warning, the doors slowly closed again. Ethan hurried into the hallway. He pressed the call button immediately. The elevator returned less than 10 seconds later. It was empty. No one could have walked away that quickly. The stairwell doors hadn't opened. The hallway remained silent. Then Ethan noticed something that made the back of his neck tighten. The illuminated button inside the elevator wasn't for the lobby. It was floor 12. Ethan stared at the glowing button for several seconds before the elevator doors closed again. This time, instead of stepping out, he stayed inside. If someone really had been there moments earlier, he wanted to understand where they had gone. The elevator descended smoothly. 19, 18, 17, until it finally stopped on the 12th floor. The doors opened onto complete darkness. Only a few emergency lights illuminated the vacant offices beyond. Plastic sheets covered sections of the walls where old company logos had been removed months earlier. Empty desks remained stacked in corners, and every sound echoed through the abandoned floor. Ethan stepped out cautiously. The elevator stayed open behind him. He walked only a few yards before noticing something unusual. One office door near the far end of the corridor stood slightly open. Every other suite had been securely locked. As he approached, he heard a faint humming sound. Inside the office, a small battery-powered lantern sat on the floor beside an extension cable. Someone had clearly been using the room recently. A half-empty bottle of water, an unopened packet of crackers, and a folded sleeping bag rested against one wall. Someone had been living there. Before Ethan could look any closer, the elevator doors behind him began closing. He instinctively ran back, slipping inside just before they shut. The ride down to the lobby felt much longer than usual. The following morning, he reported everything to building management. At first, they assumed a homeless person had somehow gained access to the vacant offices. Security reviewed the previous night's camera footage, expecting to see someone entering or leaving the building. Instead, they found something stranger. At exactly 11:42 p.m., the elevator had traveled to the 19th floor. The doors opened. Ethan was visible standing several feet away inside his office. The cameras showed no one entering the elevator, no one exiting. Yet, the elevator remained occupied. Its weight sensor consistently registered approximately 180 pounds during every unexplained journey to the 12th floor. The maintenance company was called in later that afternoon. Their inspection found no faults with the elevator itself. However, they did discover something else. Someone had secretly copied an old service key months earlier. Unlike normal employees, service keys could manually call the elevator without using the standard control panel. More importantly, they didn't always leave a digital access record. Police searched the vacant offices again that evening. This time they discovered several hidden cameras overlooking the hallway outside the elevator, each powered by rechargeable battery packs. A notebook recovered from the abandoned office contained handwritten observations listing exactly when cleaning crews arrived, when security guards completed patrols, and when employees working overtime usually left the building. The person staying there hadn't been hiding from people. They had been watching them. Detectives eventually pieced everything together. A former contractor had secretly remained inside the building after renovation work finished months earlier. Using copied service keys, he moved through vacant floors at night, studying employee routines while preparing commercial burglaries across several nearby office buildings. Whenever he heard someone approaching, he simply called the elevator remotely, stepped inside, and rode silently to another empty floor before anyone reached him. He had become so familiar with the building that he knew exactly where cameras couldn't see him. The unidentified man Ethan had glimpsed inside the elevator was never found. Police believed he escaped sometime before the investigation became public, abandoning the 12th floor office along with the surveillance equipment. The copied service key was never recovered. Several weeks later, the building upgraded every access system, replaced every elevator lock, and permanently disabled the old service controls. Employees were told the renovations had improved overall security. No one mentioned why. Ethan transferred to another office building before the end of the year. He still worked late nights from time to time, but one habit never changed. Whenever an elevator arrived unexpectedly, he always let the doors open first. And if someone was already standing inside, he waited for the next one. Story 2. the man who never got off. Rachel Morgan had stayed in enough hotels for work that checking in had become second nature. At 29 years old, she worked for a medical equipment company that regularly sent her across the Midwest for conferences and client meetings. She'd lost count of how many hotels she'd slept in over the years. Most blended together into the same routine: check in, unpack, grab dinner, sleep, then leave before sunrise. This particular trip brought her to Indianapolis. The hotel was modern, 17 stories tall, and attached to a convention center where her company would be exhibiting the following morning. After spending nearly 6 hours driving, Rachel checked in just before 10:30 p.m. The receptionist apologized for the late hour, explaining that several elevators were temporarily out of service due to scheduled maintenance. Only one guest elevator remained operational. Rachel thanked him, collected her room key, and wheeled her suitcase toward the elevator lobby. A middle-aged man was already waiting. He wore a dark baseball cap pulled low over his face and stood beside an unusually large black suitcase. It wasn't the expensive kind business travelers normally carried. It looked old, scratched, and far heavier than it should have been. The elevator arrived. Rachel stepped inside first. The man followed without saying a word. She pressed the button for the 14th floor. The man didn't press anything. The doors closed. Neither of them spoke. When the elevator reached the 4th floor, the doors opened. Nobody was waiting. Nobody entered. The doors closed again. 5th floor. Same thing. 6th. Again. Rachel frowned. She knew she hadn't pressed those buttons. By the 7th floor, she finally looked toward the control panel. Every single floor button was illuminated. From 2, all the way to 17. She was certain that hadn't been the case when she entered. The elevator continued stopping at every floor. Each hallway was empty. The man beside her never looked up, never reached for the controls, never reacted to the repeated stops. He simply stood with one hand resting on the handle of the oversized suitcase. By the 10th floor, Rachel felt herself becoming increasingly uncomfortable. She quietly stepped closer to the emergency call button without making it obvious. The elevator stopped again. The doors opened. Nobody. Closed. 11th floor. Empty. 12th. Empty. Finally, the 14th floor arrived. Rachel quickly picked up her suitcase and stepped into the hallway. As the doors began closing, she glanced back one last time. The man hadn't moved. He was still facing forward, still holding the suitcase, still riding upward. The next morning, Rachel mentioned the strange elevator ride while buying coffee in the hotel lobby. The receptionist immediately stopped smiling. He asked a very specific question. Was he carrying a large black suitcase? Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. Yeah. How did you know? The receptionist exchanged a glance with the hotel manager before quietly asking Rachel to step into the office. Inside, the manager explained that several guests had reported seeing the same man over the previous week. Always late at night, always carrying the same suitcase, always riding the elevator. Nobody had ever reported seeing him enter a room. Nobody had ever seen him leave the building. Security had reviewed CCTV more than once, but could never determine which floor he actually belonged to. Rachel assumed they were dealing with a long-term guest who enjoyed wandering the hotel. Then the manager said something that completely changed her perspective. According to the hotel's electronic key records, no guest matching that description was checked into the building, and no one had entered or exited using the lobby doors around the time Rachel had seen him. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. The manager assured her there was probably a simple explanation, but his expression suggested otherwise. Before leaving the office, he asked if she'd be willing to point the man out if she saw him again. She agreed. That evening, after dinner with several colleagues, Rachel returned to the hotel just after 10:30 p.m. The lobby looked almost identical to the previous night. One elevator remained out of service. Guests wandered through reception. Everything felt perfectly ordinary, until the receptionist quietly looked toward the elevator bank. He's here. Rachel turned. The same man stood waiting. The same dark baseball cap. The same oversized black suitcase. The manager immediately called the overnight security supervisor while discreetly watching from behind the reception desk. Rachel stayed where she was. She had no intention of getting into another elevator with him. The doors opened. The man stepped inside alone. Again, he never pressed a floor button. The manager nodded toward the security office. "We've got him on every camera this time. He can't disappear now." Security officers followed the elevator's movement from the CCTV monitors. Floor 3. Doors opened. Nobody entered. Nobody exited. Floor 4. Same thing. Floor 5. Again. The pattern continued exactly as Rachel had described. Every floor. Every hallway empty. When the elevator finally reached the 17th floor, the man stepped out carrying the suitcase. A security officer waiting nearby immediately radioed his location. "I've got him. He's heading toward the east corridor." 2 officers moved to intercept him while another covered the stairwell. The 17th floor contained only guest rooms. There was nowhere else to go. Less than 30 seconds later, the radio crackled again. "He's gone." The officers searched every hallway, every vending area, every emergency stairwell, every housekeeping cupboard. Nothing. One officer checked the guest rooms nearest the last camera sighting. Several guests answered their doors, confused by the late-night disturbance. None had seen anyone pass. Security replayed the footage. The man clearly walked down the corridor carrying the suitcase. He turned one corner. Then, he never appeared on the next camera. At first, management suspected another blind spot, until maintenance pointed out something unusual. The camera layout had no gaps. Every inch of that hallway was covered. There was no route he could have taken without being seen. The following morning, the hotel hired an outside security consultant to inspect the building. After reviewing the architectural plans, the consultant discovered that the 17th floor had been significantly altered during renovations nearly 10 years earlier. Several storage rooms had been converted into guest suites. One old housekeeping corridor had supposedly been sealed behind drywall. The measurements didn't quite add up. Contractors carefully opened part of the wall near the last place the man had been seen. Behind it, they found the forgotten service corridor. The narrow passage connected multiple maintenance cupboards, laundry chutes, and elevator equipment rooms throughout the upper floors. Fresh footprints covered the dust. Police followed the trail through the hidden corridor until they reached a locked maintenance room overlooking the elevator machinery. Inside, they discovered blankets, bottled water, canned food, spare clothing, hotel master keys, and several stolen employee uniforms. The oversized suitcase Rachel had seen wasn't there. Neither was the man. Investigators concluded that someone had secretly been living inside the abandoned service corridor for weeks, possibly longer. Using stolen uniforms and copied master keys, he moved through the hotel without attracting attention. Riding the elevator to every floor wasn't random. It allowed him to check which hallways were empty before slipping into the hidden corridor through an access panel concealed behind a housekeeping cupboard on the 17th floor. The suitcase had likely been used to transport stolen property taken from guest rooms, while housekeeping carts and late-night elevator traffic provided the perfect cover. Despite an extensive investigation, the suspect was never identified. Whoever he was, he abandoned the hidden corridor before police arrived and disappeared without leaving enough evidence to track him. Rachel finished her business trip and never stayed in that hotel again. She still travels for work. She still uses elevators almost every week. But whenever someone steps inside carrying an unusually large suitcase, she no longer wonders where they're going. She wonders whether they'll ever get off. Story 3. The elevator opened below ground. Michael Torres had worked as a hospital maintenance technician for nearly 11 years. Most people assumed his job involved fixing broken lights or replacing ceiling tiles, but large hospitals were like small cities. Every day brought something different. Air conditioning systems failed without warning, plumbing leaked behind walls, electrical panels tripped, and elevators occasionally stopped working at the worst possible moment. Because maintenance staff carried master access cards, they were often called into parts of the hospital most employees never saw. Underground service tunnels, restricted mechanical rooms, equipment storage areas hidden behind locked corridors. Michael knew almost every inch of St. Vincent Regional Hospital in St. Louis. Or at least he thought he did. One Wednesday night, shortly after midnight, the emergency department reported that a service elevator near the operating suites had stopped responding correctly. It wasn't carrying patients. It was mainly used by maintenance crews, housekeeping staff, and supply workers moving equipment between floors. Michael arrived a few minutes later. The elevator appeared perfectly normal. The doors opened. The lights worked. The inspection panel showed no faults. He stepped inside and scanned his maintenance card before pressing B2, the hospital's mechanical level where the control equipment was located. The doors closed. The elevator descended. B1. Then, instead of stopping at B2, the display briefly flashed a floor Michael had never seen before. B3. He frowned. There wasn't a B3. According to every building map he'd ever used, the hospital only had 2 basement levels. Before he could react, the elevator came to a smooth stop. The doors opened. Beyond them stretched a long concrete corridor illuminated by a handful of dim fluorescent lights. There were no signs, no hospital logos, no painted floor markings, just bare concrete walls disappearing into the distance. Michael assumed he had somehow entered an unfinished maintenance section. He stepped out carrying his flashlight. The air felt noticeably cooler. Dust covered the floor. Several old hospital beds sat abandoned against one wall, their mattresses wrapped in cracked plastic sheeting. Nearby stood rusted wheelchairs, filing cabinets, and medical equipment that looked decades old. Everything appeared to have been left exactly where someone had walked away years earlier. His radio suddenly crackled. "Maintenance, do you copy?" Michael immediately answered. "Go ahead." The reply came through covered in heavy static. "Where are you? We've been trying." The transmission disappeared. He checked his phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual underground. As he continued down the corridor, something caught his attention. Footprints. Fresh ones. Unlike the thick layer of dust covering everything else, a narrow trail of muddy boot prints continued deeper into the passage. Michael followed them for roughly 50 feet until they reached a heavy steel door standing slightly open. He carefully pushed it wider. Inside was what looked like an old hospital records room. Metal shelving stretched from floor to ceiling. Thousands of dusty cardboard boxes remained stacked exactly where they'd been left. Near the center of the room sat a folding chair, a camping lantern, 2 empty water bottles, and a sleeping bag. Someone had been there recently. Michael took one slow step backward. At that exact moment, he heard the elevator doors closing somewhere behind him. Michael spun around and hurried back toward the elevator. The corridor seemed longer than he remembered. His footsteps echoed through the concrete passage as the sound of the closing doors faded into silence. By the time he reached the elevator, it was gone. The doors were shut. The floor indicator was dark. He repeatedly pressed the call button. Nothing. No lights. No movement. His radio crackled again. This time the voice came through clearly. "Michael, where are you? We've got another maintenance call upstairs." He immediately answered. "I'm in. I don't even know where I am." The service elevator stopped on a level marked B3. Several seconds passed before his supervisor replied. "There is an AB3." Michael looked back down the deserted corridor. "That's exactly what I thought." His supervisor instructed him to stay where he was while another maintenance team checked the elevator controls from above. For nearly 8 minutes, Michael waited alone. Then, without warning, the elevator hummed back to life. The display lit up. B3. The doors slid open. He stepped inside immediately and pressed B2. Seconds later, the elevator arrived exactly where it should have the first time. His supervisor was already waiting outside. Michael explained everything. The abandoned corridor, the records room, the sleeping bag. The footprints. His supervisor listened quietly before shaking his head. I've worked here 23 years. There's never been a B3. The following morning, the hospital's engineering department inspected the elevator. Their report found no mechanical faults. More surprisingly, the elevator software contained no record of stopping below B2. According to the computer, the lift had traveled directly from the operating suites to B2 without interruption. Michael insisted that wasn't what happened. Because of the camping equipment he'd described, hospital administrators agreed to investigate further. They contacted the company that had overseen a major expansion nearly 15 years earlier. An elderly project manager visited the hospital with archived construction plans. After several hours of searching through old blueprints, he found something interesting. Before the expansion, the hospital had planned to build a third underground level dedicated to long-term document storage and utility systems. Construction began. Concrete walls were poured. Several corridors were completed. Then rising costs forced the project to be abandoned before it officially opened. Most of the unfinished level had been permanently sealed behind reinforced walls. Access was removed from public building plans. The hospital believed no one had entered the area for over a decade. Engineers located an old maintenance entrance hidden behind removable wall panels near the boiler room. Police accompanied them inside. The abandoned corridor matched Michael's description perfectly. So did the records room. The folding chair was still there. The sleeping bag remained on the floor. But whoever had been living there had disappeared. Investigators discovered food wrappers, rechargeable lanterns, spare batteries, and several stolen hospital uniforms hidden inside metal storage cabinets. More concerning, they also recovered handwritten notes documenting staff shift changes, security patrol times, and delivery schedules stretching back almost 6 months. Someone had been secretly living beneath the hospital while observing daily operations. Detectives believe the individual used forgotten maintenance passages to move throughout restricted areas before returning underground each morning. No one knew how many times employees had unknowingly passed within a few feet of the hidden entrances. Despite an extensive search, the suspect was never found. Several concealed access panels had been forced open from the inside, suggesting they escaped shortly before police arrived. The hospital permanently welded shut every remaining entrance to the abandoned level. The service elevator's control system was completely replaced. Engineers never managed to explain one detail. The elevator physically lacked programming for a B3 stop. According to every inspection, it should have been impossible for the display to show that floor at all. Michael continued working at the hospital for another 3 years. He still trusted elevators. He still used them every day, but whenever one took a second longer than expected to stop, he couldn't help glancing at the floor display, just to make sure. It never showed a level that officially didn't exist. Story 4. Every camera went black. 24-year-old Olivia Bennett had lived in the same apartment building for almost 2 years. Located just outside downtown Seattle, the 12-story complex was modern, well-maintained, and advertised as one of the safest apartment buildings in the area. Residents needed electronic key fobs to enter the lobby. Every hallway was covered by security cameras, and the 2 elevators recorded video 24 hours a day. It was one of the reasons Olivia had chosen the building. She often worked late shifts as an emergency veterinary nurse, sometimes arriving home well after midnight. Knowing the building had multiple security systems helped her feel comfortable walking inside alone. For nearly 2 years, nothing unusual ever happened. Then packages started disappearing. At first, management assumed thieves were following delivery drivers into the lobby during the day. New cameras were installed. Residents received emails reminding them not to let strangers inside. Nothing changed. The thefts continued. Curiously, every package seemed to disappear within minutes of being delivered. Management reviewed hours of CCTV footage. Nobody was ever seen taking them. The cameras simply showed packages arriving. Then, several minutes later, they were gone. Police suggested the cameras might have blind spots. Management insisted they didn't. Every entrance, hallway, elevator, and mailroom was covered. Olivia barely paid attention until one rainy Thursday night. She returned home shortly after 1 a.m., carrying food from a nearby restaurant. The lobby was empty. She entered the elevator alone and pressed the button for the 9th floor. As the doors closed, she noticed a small black dome camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. She'd ridden this elevator hundreds of times. She'd never really looked at it before. The elevator climbed smoothly. 3rd floor, 4th, 5th. Then, the lights flickered once, only for a fraction of a second. The elevator kept moving. When the doors opened on the 9th floor, Olivia walked toward her apartment. Halfway down the corridor, she noticed something strange. Her neighbor, Mrs. Watkins, stood outside her own door looking confused. "Did your elevator lights flicker?" Olivia nodded. "Yeah." "Why?" Mrs. Watkins hesitated. "Because mine always does. Every night. Exactly once." Olivia laughed politely, assuming it was another harmless electrical issue. The following evening, she happened to check the time as the lights flickered again. 1:07 a.m. The night after that, 1:07. Again. Curious, she mentioned it to the building manager. He smiled. "Old wiring. Nothing to worry about." Still, something didn't sit right with her. A week later, another resident posted in the building's online group asking whether anyone else had noticed brief power flickers inside the elevators around 1 in the morning. Within an hour, 7 different people replied. Every single one described the exact same thing. Always around 1:07 a.m. Always lasting less than 2 seconds. Management finally hired a security company to inspect the surveillance system. The technicians reviewed several weeks of recordings from the elevator cameras. At first, everything looked normal. Then one technician paused the footage. Every night, at exactly 1:07 a.m., the elevator camera feed froze. Not for 2 seconds, for 23 seconds. The lights hadn't flickered because of faulty wiring. They'd flickered because the surveillance system briefly lost power. 23 seconds wasn't long, but it was long enough for someone to enter or leave an elevator without ever appearing on camera. The discovery immediately changed the investigation. Instead of reviewing the footage frame by frame, the security technicians focused only on the 23-second gaps. Every night, the outage happened at precisely 1:07 a.m. Never earlier, never later. The interruption affected only the elevator cameras. Every hallway camera continued recording normally. At first, management assumed they were dealing with a software bug. Then one technician noticed something even stranger. Each time the elevator camera went offline, one elevator always traveled to the parking garage level. Not because someone pressed the button. The command originated from the elevator's maintenance control system. Only building engineers had access to those controls. The following night, 2 plainclothes police officers waited inside the security office while another officer parked outside the underground garage. At exactly 1:07 a.m., the elevator cameras froze. 23 seconds. The maintenance logs showed one elevator descending to the garage. The hallway cameras remained active. When the video returned, the elevator was empty. No one had entered. No one had exited. Or so it seemed. The officer stationed inside the garage radioed the security office. "I've got movement. Someone just came out of the elevator." Police rushed toward the underground level. The suspect spotted them immediately and disappeared through a fire exit before officers could close the distance. Although they escaped, detectives finally knew the thefts weren't random. Someone had found a way to move through the building without appearing on the elevator cameras. The next morning, elevator engineers dismantled the ceiling above one of the lifts. Hidden behind a removable maintenance panel, they found a small electronic device wired directly into the elevator's surveillance system. The device had been programmed to briefly interrupt power to the camera every night at exactly 1:07 a.m. It didn't affect the elevator itself, only the recording. The suspect had simply waited until the camera went dark before riding between floors unnoticed. But there was still one unanswered question. How had they entered the building? Residents needed electronic key fobs. Every access point was logged. The answer came from a detective reviewing maintenance records. 6 months earlier, a fire sprinkler contractor had spent 3 weeks working throughout the building. Several master keys issued during that project had never been returned. Police tracked down every contractor who had worked on the renovation. One former subcontractor failed to appear for questioning. His name was already familiar to investigators. He was wanted in connection with package thefts at multiple apartment complexes across Washington state. Detectives believed he had secretly copied building master keys before disappearing, giving him unrestricted access long after the work had finished. Using the modified elevator cameras, he waited until residents went to sleep before quietly collecting packages that had been delivered overnight. The stolen property was loaded into his vehicle through the underground garage before anyone realized it was missing. Several weeks later, officers arrested the suspect while he attempted the same method at another apartment building. Inside his van, police recovered dozens of unopened packages, copied master keys, maintenance uniforms, and electronic equipment almost identical to the device recovered from Olivia's elevator. Building management upgraded every elevator camera and installed independent backup power supplies so they could no longer be disabled by a single interruption. They also replaced every master key in the complex. Life eventually returned to normal. Packages stopped disappearing. The elevators worked exactly as they should, but Olivia never forgot one particular detail. For nearly 6 months, the building's cameras hadn't actually failed. They had been working exactly as someone intended. Because sometimes, you don't need to disable every security camera. You only need to make people believe they're still recording. Story 5. The elevator stopped between floors. Jason Miller had been working as an overnight office cleaner for almost 3 years. Most people assumed the job was lonely, but Jason actually preferred it. By the time he arrived each evening, the skyscraper in downtown Atlanta was almost empty. Thousands of employees had already gone home, leaving only a handful of cleaners, security officers, and maintenance staff spread across 32 floors. The routine never changed. Start on the top floor, work downward, finish shortly before sunrise. Every floor took roughly 40 minutes, and the quickest way between them was the building's service elevator. Unlike the public elevators in the main lobby, the service lift opened directly into maintenance corridors used only by employees. It wasn't luxurious, but it was reliable. Until one Thursday night. Around 1:20 a.m., Jason finished cleaning the 28th floor and wheeled his cart toward the service elevator. As the doors opened, another man stepped inside. Jason had never seen him before. The man wore a dark maintenance uniform with a company logo stitched onto the chest. An employee ID hung around his neck, though it was turned backwards. Evening. The man smiled politely. Long night. Jason nodded. Same as always. The man pressed the button for the lobby. Jason selected the 27th floor. The doors closed. The elevator descended normally for several seconds. Then, without warning, it stopped. Not at a floor. Between them, the lights remained on. No alarm sounded. Everything simply became still. Jason looked at the floor display. Instead of showing 27 or 26, the screen was blank. The man beside him didn't seem surprised. He calmly folded his arms and stared at the closed doors. Jason pressed the door open button. Nothing happened. He tried the emergency intercom. No response. His phone showed no signal. After nearly a minute, the elevator suddenly jerked back into motion. The display lit up again. 27. The doors opened as though nothing had happened. Jason stepped out immediately. The maintenance worker remained inside. The doors closed. The elevator continued toward the lobby. Jason didn't think much about it until the following evening. At exactly 1:20 a.m., the same man entered the elevator. The same uniform, The same reversed ID badge. Again, he pressed the lobby. Again, the elevator stopped between floors. Again, the display went completely blank. This time Jason paid closer attention. The maintenance worker never looked at the controls, never appeared frustrated. Instead, he quietly looked upward toward the ceiling as if he were listening for something above them. Exactly 1 minute later, the elevator resumed moving. When the doors opened on the 27th floor, Jason stepped out. Before the doors closed, he finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Do you work nights here often?" The man looked at him for a second before answering. "Not officially." The doors slid shut. Jason stood there confused. The following morning, he mentioned the repeated elevator problem to building security. The supervisor frowned. He checked the elevator logs. According to the system, the elevator had never stopped between floors. Both journeys had been completely normal. Then Jason described the maintenance worker. Dark uniform, gray hair, reversed ID badge. The supervisor slowly looked up from the computer. "That's impossible. We don't have anyone here matching that description." The supervisor stood up and walked into a storage room before returning with a thick binder containing employee records. He flipped through dozens of photographs before stopping on one page. Jason immediately recognized the man. Same gray hair, same calm expression, same maintenance uniform. "That's him." The supervisor stared at the photograph for several seconds. His name was Richard Lawson. He worked building maintenance here for nearly 15 years. Jason waited for the rest. The supervisor quietly closed the binder. He retired almost 8 years ago. Jason assumed he meant the man had simply moved away. Then the supervisor explained. Richard had never actually retired. One night, while repairing equipment above the service elevator shaft, he failed to sign back in after finishing his work. When another employee went looking for him the following morning, they discovered he'd fallen through an unsecured maintenance platform. He died inside the elevator shaft before anyone realized he was missing. Jason felt a chill run through him. That can't be the same guy. The supervisor agreed. It couldn't. Still, he asked Jason to point the man out if he ever appeared again. The following night, Jason intentionally finished the 28th floor a little early. At exactly 1:20 a.m., the service elevator arrived. The doors opened. The same maintenance worker stepped inside. Jason entered after him. Neither of them spoke. The man pressed the lobby button. The elevator began descending. Then, just as before, it stopped between floors. The display went blank. The maintenance worker slowly raised his head toward the ceiling. Jason noticed something he hadn't seen during the previous rides. Very faint metallic scraping echoed somewhere above them, almost as if someone was dragging heavy equipment across steel. The maintenance worker finally spoke. Quietly, "They're early tonight." Jason looked at him. "What?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly at Jason for the first time. "Take the stairs." Before Jason could ask another question, the elevator suddenly lurched back into motion. The doors opened on the 27th floor. Jason stepped out instinctively. When the doors closed, the maintenance worker remained inside. Jason stood there for a moment before deciding to follow the strange advice. Instead of using the elevator again, he pushed his cleaning cart toward the emergency stairwell. Halfway down to the 26th floor, he heard shouting below. Security officers were running upward. One of them nearly collided with him. "Stay in the stairwell. Don't use the elevators." Jason asked what had happened. The officer explained that 3 burglars had entered the building through a rooftop maintenance hatch shortly after midnight. They had been hiding above the elevator machinery while waiting for the overnight cleaners to move between floors. Their plan was simple. Wait until someone entered the service elevator. Use the emergency stop controls located above the shaft to trap the lift between floors. Then break into executive offices while employees remained stranded inside with no phone signal. But something had gone wrong. Security cameras showed the suspects abandoning the plan and fleeing across the rooftop before police arrived. When detectives questioned one of the arrested burglars later that week, He admitted they believed someone else was already inside the elevator machinery room before they arrived. They heard footsteps above them, metal tools being moved, and what sounded like another maintenance worker walking through the restricted area. They assumed security had discovered them early, so they panicked and ran. Police searched the machinery room. No one was there. Only old maintenance tools stored years earlier. The emergency stop controls had been partially tampered with, but never fully activated. Building management later installed new security systems around the rooftop access points and permanently locked the old maintenance ladders leading above the elevator shaft. Jason finished the remainder of his contract without another unexplained elevator ride. The service elevator never stopped between floors again. No employee matching Richard Lawson's photograph ever appeared on CCTV. Officially, the investigation concluded that the burglars abandoned their plan because they mistakenly believed someone was already watching them. Jason wasn't so sure, because he still remembered the final words the maintenance worker spoke before the doors opened. Take the stairs. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment telling me which story unsettled you the most, and subscribe to Dreadful Visions for more realistic horror stories inspired by the everyday places we trust the most. New stories are uploaded every other day, and the next ordinary place could become the setting for your next nightmare. Until next time, stay alert, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes the safest looking places are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Sleep well tonight, if you can.